so often, a few of us get together to look at the readings that are coming up in the next few weeks. And at one of our gatherings recently, one of those present, in commenting on today's reading from James, said, in his letter, James is encouraging his readers to make their own the mind and heart of God, who never shows partiality. And then I began to think, well, that sounds reasonable. In his letter, James tells us that we should treat the poor person who comes into the assembly dressed in shabby clothes with the same respect as the one who comes sporting gold rings and fine clothes. Well, fair enough. We are to show no partiality. But is the member of my group right in asserting that God shows no partiality? And so listen to the remaining words from the reading. Brothers and sisters, did not God choose those who are poor in the world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom? Now, does that sound like impartiality to you? Maybe not. But then when you read those words from James with the rest of the Bible in mind, especially the prophets, Amos, for example, or Isaiah, Hosea, and then Luke's gospel, where 7 out of 10 verses deal with the poor. Well, the case for God's impartiality seems to lose even more ground. Think, for instance, of Mary, who in her great hymn of praise in Luke's gospel, the Magnificat, celebrates the God who casts down the mighty from their thrones and lifts up the lowly, who fills the hungry with good things and sends the rich away empty. Impartial? Maybe not. And then think of Jesus, who was born in the poverty of an animal shelter, and of the simple, rough shepherds who were his first visitors. Think, too, of Jesus, the teacher, who made it clear that he came to bring good news to the poor, and who spent so much of his time among the poor, the down and out, sinners, prostitutes, tax collectors, and other undesirables. And think also of the Jesus in Matthew's gospel, who told us that it was meeting the poor, the hungry, and the homeless that we would be actually meeting him. But there's still more. St. Paul in 1 Corinthians speaks of the foolishness of God, who chooses the foolish of the world to shame the wise, the weak of the world to shame the strong, the poor and the despised of the world, those who count for nothing, to reduce to nothing those who are something. Now, I don't think I need to belabor the point. There's nothing wonderful about poverty. I think we can agree on that. But for all their misery, the poor of this world have something to teach us. They also have a special claim on God. In nearly all of its social teaching since the Second Vatican Council, the Church has echoed and emphasized this theme, speaking strongly, and to some, I'm sure, surprisingly. It speaks of a preferential option for the poor. And in recent years, Pope Francis has clearly elevated the poor to the very top of the Church's agenda, calling our attention to what he calls an inseparable bond between our faith and the poor, and uttering a strong "thou shalt not" to what he calls an economy of exclusion and inequality. How can it be, he asks, that it is not a news item when an elderly poor person dies of exposure, but it is news when the stock market loses a couple of points? So this much is clear. We Catholics simply do not line up with prosperity gospel Christians who espouse a preferential option for the wealthy. They view wealth, success, and prosperity as sure signs of God's favor. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not that God doesn't love people who are wealthy. God most certainly does. But God's gifts are given to be shared, not hoarded. And the more we have received, the more we are to give. I can't tell you how often and how deeply moved I am by people in our parish with significant means who are incredibly generous in sharing their means. They would be the first to agree that it's when they do share, when they give generously, that they are the happiest and feel closest to God. And so, my friends, yes, God loves all of us, rich and poor alike. That's a given. And God often shows his love for the rich by inspiring them to use their wealth to help the poor. But in the end, the claim of my friends notwithstanding, a convincing case can be made that when it comes to the poor, God does play favorites. Now, one thing more though. There is a sense in which every one of us is poor. We are all spiritually poor before God. And that's why we're coming forward in a few minutes. That's why we need to come forward to receive the Eucharist. The Eucharist is God's great gift that makes us rich in the only way that really counts.